In our last video, we spoke about the failure of the rentier-state model in Venezuela that has led to an economic crisis. In this video, we will be discussing the nature of these vested foreign interests and critically analyzing the same. Schopenhauer said, "Every state regards another as a gang of robbers who will fall upon it as soon as there is an opportunity." As Venezuela plunged deeper into economic crisis, the contending interests of various actors have increased situations of conflict, thus leading to uncertainty and tensions in Caracas. So, what are the issues which Venezuela faces today? We will be discussing the foreign policy of Venezuela with respect to Russia, USA, and China, which further aggravated the economic crisis. Under Chavez, Russia became one of Venezuela's strongest allies. In 2008, Lukoil, Rosneft, TNK BP, and Gazprom established the National Oil Consortium for Venezuelan operations. PDVSA and Gazprom then created a joint venture in 2012 called Petra-Zamora. In 2013, PDVSA said it signed a deal with Gazprom Bank for $1 billion in financing for the Petra-Zamora company. Corruption is an outcome of the rentier-state model. A US court announced that Gazprom Bank and PDVSA were involved in bribery schemes. In 2017, Moscow bailed Venezuela out by restructuring more than $3 billion in sovereign debt. Russia's state-backed oil giant Rosneft is one of Venezuela's largest foreign backers. Maduro also signed a deal giving Rosneft 49.9% of Citgo. PDVSA has been negotiating with Russia since 2018, offering Rosneft ownership interests in up to 9 of Venezuela's most productive petroleum projects. Russian oil producer Lukoil's trading arm Litasco has stopped carrying out swap operations with Venezuela since US sanctions were imposed. In the light of many foreign firms cutting off ties with the PDVSA since the sanctions were imposed, the fact that a lender closely aligned with the Russian state is following suit is significant because the Kremlin has been among Maduro's avid supporters. One of the fastest growing destinations for Venezuelan crude oil exports has been China. The Venezuelan government approached China in the mid-2000s in the search for development assistance. Both governments set up ongoing funding mechanisms for short-term spending in various productive matters. The first one is the China-Venezuela Development Fund, which was originally set up by 60% contribution from Chinese Development Bank and 40% by Venezuela's National Development Bank. This fund, also known as Fondo Pesado, Heavy Fund, was established as a lending mechanism in 3 tracks. These loans are all commodity-backed. They are repaid through oil exports. A different funding mechanism called Gran Volumen was agreed in 2010 for US dollars 20 billion. In contrast to the Heavy Fund, the Gran Volume is a longer-term development fund in the form of a 10-year loan. The rise of China and the boom of raw materials prices opened an opportunity window to undermine the US leverage in Venezuelan domestic issues. Maduro is committed to stronger relations with China. In 2014, on a trip by Maduro to see President Xi Jinping, investments worth $14 billion were announced. In 2014, Maduro argued that the funding China provides is not conditioned to economic adjustments, to social subjugation, or the denial of our people's fundamental right. By purchasing Venezuela's oil in advance and providing necessary investments for future extraction, China is securing control of significant portions of the Orinoco Basin's oil reserves. Venezuela, on the other hand, has increased its dependence on hydrocarbon extraction and has used state control over natural resources as a means to further its political ambitions.
US policymakers in Congress have had concerns for more than a decade about the deterioration of human rights and democratic conditions in Venezuela after the 2014 government opposition dialogue supported by the Obama administration failed. The administration imposed visa restrictions and asset-blocking sanctions on Venezuelan officials involved in human rights abuses. In 2014, Venezuela's heavy-handed crackdown on protesters calling for a change led to strong US criticism of the Venezuelan government. Some analysts maintain that the imposition of the sanctions played into Maduro's narrative of Venezuela being bullied by US aggression. In 2015, Venezuela was the third largest foreign supplier of crude oil and products to the United States. Venezuela's oil exports to the United States were decreased from $29 billion in 2014 to $14.8 billion in 2015, thus reflecting a steep decline in the price of oil. Rafael Ramirez said that Venezuelans use about 323,000 barrels of gasoline a day, and despite having enormous oil reserves, Venezuela has imported tens of thousands of barrels of gasoline a day from the United States over the last 2 years. So in effect, the Venezuelan government has been paying market prices, which averaged about $2.70 a gallon last year, to import gasoline that it gives away almost for free. Venezuela may have a lot to lose in a default too. Its foreign debt is partly owed by the state-owned oil company, PDVSA. Venezuelan officials fear that a default would bring bondholder lawsuits. This could severely disrupt PDVSA's operations and result in seizure of the company's overseas assets, perhaps even from its Houston subsidiary, Citgo Petroleum Corporation. And as the production from El Furial and other fields plummet, the state oil company has to lean even more heavily on Citgo. Goldman Sachs has decided to snap up $2.8 billion worth of PDVSA bonds maturing in 2022. There is a lot of interest in this trade, said Carlos de Souza. We are in a low-rate environment and these are dollar bonds with really high yields. At the root of what makes the bonds so attractive to investors is the crucial role played by the Venezuelan oil company in providing foreign exchange to the embattled Maduro government. PDVSA brings in about 95% of the economy's dollars, so foreign investors believe that the government will do all it can to keep the company functioning. Whatever Mr. Trump decides to do next is likely to echo from the Venezuelan treasury to the American gasoline pump. Despite nearly 2 decades of sour relations with Venezuela, the United States has enormous leverage as one of Venezuela's most important customers. The staying power of Maduro's embattled government may hinge on 3 critical countries: USA, Russia, and China. The Venezuela standoff turned deadly as troops blocked aid. While Maduro's control over security forces remained intact, it may turn problematic in the future. While Maduro and his party are incentivized to forestall a regime change, the long-term interests of his party only overlap with his in terms of stopping Guaido, not in salvaging Maduro. By making it more likely that the military will ultimately turn on the party before the party has a chance to turn on Maduro, the likelihood rises that the next government will be an opposition one. Nevertheless, party leaders have publicly celebrated the torching of international food convoys en route to a near-starving population, thus indicating implicit trust in the president. Albertus argued that there is still a way out of Venezuela's stalemate, as both sides should heed the lessons of negotiated transitions in other countries such as Chile and South Africa to forge a peace pact to democracy. While Guaido has declared himself Venezuela's president, so far the military remains deeply entrenched in the economy from support of Maduro that it has cast its lot with. Chavez effectively gave the military control of the PDVSA. To encourage the military to support a transition, the opposition needs to guarantee it legal and direct sources of revenue, which may prove to be difficult. No one can predict the timing of Maduro's exit, but thoughtful and tactical Trump administration policies can likely hasten that day. The formation of the Lima Group, a gathering of 14 regional governments, in response to the Venezuela crisis was a significant achievement in a hemisphere not known for this sort of multilateral action. It has been proposed that the Lima Group must remain at the center of the struggle for democracy in Venezuela. US policy toward Venezuela has enjoyed a bipartisan consensus in Congress through successive administrations. Additionally, the Trump administration has been clear it sees Venezuela's current path as irreversible, meaning that there is not a single scenario in which Maduro remains in power. According to the US, recognizing Juan Guaido as Venezuela's leader is an embrace of democracy. This year, intergovernmental organizations such as Organization of American States published a report that found that there are reasonable grounds to conclude that 7 major crimes against humanity have been committed against civilians in Venezuela. However, a community of authoritarian states are backing Maduro. Talks of a joint nuclear base between Kremlin and Caracas are ongoing. While diplomatically endorsing and militarily entrenching the Maduro dictatorship, Putin has encouraged pursuing negotiations. But such negotiations without preconditions have already been pursued many times, with many different mediators, always resulting in Venezuelan people being worse off than before. More than 2.7 million Venezuelans have fled poverty, hunger, violence, and persecution in recent years, and the United Nations has characterized the situation as a humanitarian crisis. The intensification of migrant flows have strained the capacity of host countries to provide basic services. Romero and Mijares argued that the historical currents of socio-political fragmentation, regional tension, and the energy market pose difficulties to the continuation of an expansive foreign policy, but in turn act as a stimulus for greater centralization of power internally and the politicization of the foreign policy agenda, in line with the objectives and general trends pursued by the governing party. Due to Venezuela's new strategic orientations and priorities amidst the economic crisis, many international oil companies are less interested in amassing large reserves that take many years to develop and might become stranded assets that won't be needed in 20 or 30 years, save for the case of China. While Beijing Beijing has continued its support for Maduro in recent years. Its loyalty largely depends on Caracas's capacity to pay its debts. In recent years, China has grown increasingly wary of Venezuela defaulting on its payment, and it has opened communication channels with the opposition. Even so, China, which like Russia, has a permanent seat on the Security Council, objects to UN intervention in Venezuela's political affair. The Kremlin, too, has condemned the Trump administration's recognition of Guaido and warned the United States against a military intervention. Maduro's allies have enabled him to maintain his grip on power despite years of domestic unrest. Decisions by Russia and China could cause the Maduro regime's undoing or extend its reign. Ultimately, what comes next rests on the strength of Maduro's alliances. Apart from the civil unrest and outflow of refugees, tougher sanctions could lead Venezuela to default on their bonds, and a collapse of internal investment and oil production may occur. Any trade embargo could raise gasoline prices in other countries such as USA and dampen profits for several major refiners. A decrease in Venezuelan exports could raise global oil prices, bolstering the economies of Russia and Iran. Shutt Thompson characterized sanctions as disruptive because of its potential to exponentially increase fuel prices. Serious economic and social deterioration linked to the decline in international oil prices has led to major challenges to Venezuelan regional leadership in recent years, reflected in recent changes to its foreign policy. There is no telling what will happen if Guaido takes over Maduro. Watch our next video for more information on the recent developments in Venezuela and the new issues and questions that are likely to emerge.